Tucson's largest school district is searching for a new superintendent.
The ultimate goal is you want the best fit.
We also hear from a board member who says the district's business must go on, even without a permanent superintendent. Then, an update on the proposed Rosemont copper mine.
In essence, it shows that we will not violate any American laws, whether they be state, local, or federal.
And the mine's continued controversy.
We have no choice but to keep fighting.
This is Metro Week. Hi, I'm Andrea Kelly. Thanks for joining us. We're checking in on the superintendent search in the Tucson Unified School District. We'll find out what the public is asking for in the next leader of Tucson's largest school district. That's after a look at other top stories from the Arizona Public Media Newsroom this week.
Arizona Senator Jeff Flake was one of the witnesses to Wednesday's shooting at a congressional baseball practice. Senator Flake came to Tucson following the 2011 shooting when Gabrielle Giffords was wounded. That event brought civility, and many question whether that can happen now.
Well, I think for a time we had it, and it was a nice respite. I hope that this lasts longer this time. It's been needed for a long time. It's unfortunate that something like this has to prompt it and make us think, about it.
Southern Arizona Representatives Raul Grijalva and Martha McSally echoed Senator Flake's call to tone down the rhetoric. The University of Arizona's College of Medicine in Phoenix was granted full accreditation this week. It was granted preliminary accreditation as an independent school in 2012 and then provisional status last year. 354 students attend the school in downtown Phoenix. University of Arizona President Robert Robbins said full accreditation is an important milestone in the evolution of the College of Medicine in Phoenix. A 44-unit affordable housing project opened this week for homeless veterans in Tucson. The facility near Davis-Monthan Air Force Base was funded by the state, county bonds, and tax credits. It's part of the city and county's goal to find housing for all homeless veterans. For more on all of these stories, visit our website.
The Tucson Unified School District's governing board hired a consultant to help find the next superintendent. He's Nick Clemente, retired superintendent of Flowing Wells Schools. Clement joined me in the studio to explain the process, and I asked why he took on the project.
Well, I retired about 4 years ago as superintendent of Flowing Wells, and I wasn't ready just to disconnect from the education world, and so I've been doing projects that I think have benefit for teaching and learning, and I'm in that pay it forward part of my life. And so I do some searches, I do training, I do some work with NAU, and when they approached me about being the consultant, I saw it as an opportunity to help the community. I've lived 34 years in the community, and although I don't live in the TUSD district, I'm still part of the community. So I saw it as an opportunity, a challenge, a way to help move the district forward, and ultimately it comes down to helping kids and improving the learning experience for every kid in this community.
As the leader of this search, and also just someone who's been in educational leadership for so long, from the outside, what is it that you see the district needs as this search goes on?
Well, the ultimate goal is you want the best fit. You want the best fit of the leader with the challenges, short-term and long-term, for the district. So the ultimate goal is to get that best fit. Along the way, though, process goals are as important and sometimes more important. And what I talked to the board about, and they signed on to this idea of process goals, and that is that the search be as transparent as possible and that it be as stakeholder driven as possible as we move through the process. So that's what I'm working on right now, is getting to that ultimate goal, helping the board get to the ultimate goal, and all along the way doing it in a way that's transparent and get stakeholder involvement.
So in the meetings that you've held with the public, what have they come up with as things that they see the district needs in its next leader?
So I've done 2 phases and then a kind of a side phase that's ongoing. So the first phase of stakeholder input is I visited 5 TUSD schools during the last week of school, and I sat in their lounge, their cafeteria, and I had stakeholders come to me on their own time. I didn't want to disrupt the educational process, so they came and they shared their thoughts about the profile of the new superintendent, what they wanted. And then I had another phase where on June 8th, we had forums for the whole community to come. And then I've set up an email, so I'm taking input through email. The first round, I had over 200 responses.
And that was in the schools.
In the schools. And I took that data, those responses. I actually have a colleague at NAU who does work in this area, and I sent the data and had it analyzed by a couple researchers. And at the board meeting, I will be presenting the themes. And those themes, the strongest theme was longevity. Those stakeholders, and it is also coming out as a theme. We haven't had the second round totally completed yet, but that theme is also coming out of the June 8th forums. They want a leader who's here for the long term, who that there's some consistency and that it's more stable. They want a leader that's visible, that's out in schools, that not only is in schools, but that talks and listens to teachers, support staff, parents, and hears their input. So a visible leader. They want the new leader to have the primary focus on students, basically a students first. With every decision that's made, you ask the question, is it good for kids? And then experience leading a large urban diverse district. And the next round, things have come out like a collaborator, a culture builder, a team builder, someone who can bring people to the table, leaders in the community, and begin to move forward and improve the educational experience for every kid. And along that, with that, is improve the facilities at every school, so you have equitable facilities and resources. So those are some of the really strong themes that are coming out of these forums. I can tell you that there's a lot of passion out there.
People care about the quality of education and their children's experience.
They do. It's very personal. They have I can tell you there was a lot of passion when I listened to people and they talked.
The search is expected to continue for several months. Clement says the application is open until the end of June. Then there will be a public review and a board review before finalists are named. Once finalists are identified, each will be invited to visit schools, and each will be expected to answer questions from the public. That's one forum for every finalist. The district aims to select the next superintendent in September. Meanwhile, the school district's governing board will keep operating with the interim superintendent. This week, for example, the board reconsidered its strategic plan. Board member Mark Stegeman joined me for an update.
Well, the board changed in January, and I think the new board has a slightly different philosophy, and so we need to make some adjustments in the plan, and we talked about that. We have a 65-page plan from before, and I was proposing to replace it with 5 or 6 short goals, but we'll probably finish up with that in 2 weeks.
So you didn't make any final decisions about making
Right.
changes?
I think it was a good discussion, and actually I think I got some ideas that I can bring back a proposal that's a little better than what I had this time, and maybe we'll adopt something in 2 weeks.
Dive into some of those details that you are interested in changing. What would you want to see in the new strategic plan?
Well, I'm not even really proposing a plan.
Okay.
I'm proposing a statement of what the board cares about. And so I'm proposing to say that what the board cares about is student achievement, enrollment, teacher retention and turnover, implementing the unitary status plan, school climate and culture, and getting money out of administration into the classroom. So those 6 general goals.
How does that differ from what's in the 65-page previous plan?
It's about 1/1000th as long. So
Length,
I'm
of
not
course.
sure that anyone.
Any details change?
I'm not sure that. No, it is a difference in emphasis. So the old strategic plan didn't even mention the unitary status plan. It doesn't really, in 65 pages, even mention school climate. It hardly mentions enrollment. And so it's not just making it shorter, but I think the emphasis is really different.
And the unitary status plan is essentially the desegregation.
Right. That's the name of the court order that we're operating under.
So you'll revisit the strategic plan in a few weeks, possibly make changes, see what the
Yeah,
board makes.
I think I'm hoping that we will just pull the old one back and substitute this statement of goals. I think is much easier to understand.
And this week the board approved a bond election for the fall. So that is asking voters to approve some borrowing to do some spending that's not in the budget at this point. What would that spending be for? What is the board proposing to ask voters?
It's a relatively small bond, and it's dedicated to critical facilities repairs mostly. There were some larger packages on the table that would have had to do with expanding technology and expanding classrooms and stuff, but this one is really just critical repairs.
So again, that's building maintenance that hasn't been funded by the state.
Yeah, it's deferred, a lot of deferred maintenance mostly.
And the board was a split vote, a 3-2 vote on that, and you voted against it. What was your opposition?
It's not because we don't need it, but I'm not sure we're ready to get that passed. The city's raising taxes this year, the county is raising taxes. I think there's still a lot of skepticism about TUSD. The last time we went to the voters, it was a 62% no vote. So we have a long way to go to get over that, and I don't think we're quite there yet. I think Rachel and I, she was the other no vote.
Rachel Sedgwick.
Yeah, Rachel Sedgwick would prefer to go next year after we've had another year to build confidence in what we're doing.
What do you think it would take to build that confidence to get to a yes vote from voters in your perspective?
Well, I think that the election right now is only 5 months away, so the whole PR campaign is going to be compressed into 4 or 5 months since early voting's in October, and I don't think that's a lot of time, especially over the summer, to make the case. I think that we are making reforms in financial accountability and transparency that are just beginning, and people can't really see the results of that yet. I think we're trying to cut administration and get more money into the classroom, but again, that's just beginning. And if we wait a year and we can say, look, this is all the stuff that we've done, then I think it'll be more convincing. We'll have a superintendent at that time who can be involved in the process instead of being in the middle of a superintendent search, which makes everything less clear. And so I think there are a lot of things that would make our case stronger next year.
I do want to talk about the superintendent search, but before we move on to that, can you tell me what some of your colleagues who voted in favor of starting a bond election, what were their arguments for doing it now?
Well, I think the main argument was the needs are critical. Okay. And I don't really disagree with that. I just think that putting it on the ballot doesn't bring any money in. To bring money in, you have to win. And I think our chances of winning this year are probably not good. And I think losing this year makes it politically harder than next year. We went out in 2009 and lost by a small margin. And then they went out again in 2010 and got whipped. I think I'm afraid of a similar scenario.
So on the topic of the superintendent search, obviously that's ongoing. How does that affect the way the board does its business now with the interim superintendent who's in place until you hire a permanent?
I think the interim is doing well. It's Gabriel Trujillo. He was already an assistant superintendent, so he was familiar with what's going on, and he really stepped in with hardly missing a beat. So I think he's doing well, and it's been a very smooth transition.
Do you have to weigh issues in terms of what needs to be decided now versus what can wait until the person who's going to carry out those decisions in the future starts later this year? I mean, are you kind of trying to figure out
I don't
what
think
to
we've hit
decide?
much of that yet. Right now, we're wrapped up with the budget. The budget has to be done by July 1 in any case, and so that's going to be done before the new person comes in. The desegregation case, I think we're on a trajectory. We sort of know our direction there, and I don't think a new superintendent would change that too much. So, I mean, I'm sure the new superintendent would come in and set their own priorities, but I don't think it has affected much yet.
What are you looking for in that next hire, in the next person who will carry out the decisions the board makes?
Well, there's a question of what I'm looking for and what the board's looking for. I don't think it's actually very different. I think there's a lot of agreement on that. I think the biggest thing for me is someone who has a demonstrated record of raising student achievement. Everyone talks about raising student achievement. We are a poor community. We have a lot of lower income students. And it's hard to there aren't that many persons who can really show that they did it. And so I want someone who not just talks about it, but can show that they did it. And of course, administrative experience. We have a very big district, which is hard to manage, and I don't think there's any substitute for experience.
There's been a lot of attention, or there was, when former Superintendent H.T. Sanchez quit. There was a lot of attention on the turnover, the rate of turnover among superintendents in Tucson Unified School District. Is that rate of turnover a concern for you?
Yes, I absolutely agree that when superintendents turn over quickly, it's not good. It's not unusual either. In districts around the country, the average tenure in urban districts is pretty short. But the fact that it's typical doesn't make it good. And in districts around here like Vail and Amphi that have had long-term superintendents do better. But I think the biggest part of solving that problem is having a very careful process for selecting superintendents. I mean, that's really where you get it right. And I don't think TUSD has historically had very good processes for that, and we're trying to do it better this year.
You can keep up with those issues and other developments from TUSD on our website, and of course we'll follow up when a new superintendent is hired. On to a much debated issue in southern Arizona for the past decade, the proposed Rosemont copper mine. The argument has raged over whether the copper the mine would produce and the jobs it would create outweigh environmental damage, air and water quality degradation. This month, the U.S. Forest Service approved the environmental plan for the proposed mine, bringing it one step closer to a final decision. Hudbay Minerals Vice President Patrick Marin joined me to talk about the project and what this decision means.
So the Record of Decision is one of the 2 federal permits that are required for us to start mining operations. It's been a process that's been ongoing for about 11 years, has a very substantial public input comment to it. Our project had about 36,000 public comments and about 9 months worth of time for people to look at our initial design and to comment in on it. Had about 17 cooperating agencies at all different levels of government, so local, state, and federal. And in essence, it shows that we will not violate any American laws, whether they be state, local, or federal, which then allows us to move ahead and begin a mining operation.
What does it require you to do in terms of the actual operation? It's my understanding that it designated where you'll put the tailings or some of the operational details, so go into that detail for me.
So we propose what is called a mine plan of operations, which is a preliminary plan of how we expect to operate the mine. The Forest Service and its cooperating agencies then evaluate the impacts or the potential impacts from the project and ensure that we will meet federal standards. So in many cases, they're not requiring us to do certain things. It's the permitting agency. So as an example, the state agencies oversee many of the permits that we actually see, and the Forest Service just ensures that the impacts that are projected will meet and will allow us to obtain those permits. Many of those permits, if not all of them, have already been received. So the Forest Service job is to evaluate impacts and then make sure that we will meet federal law.
But does it designate how specifically how you do it, some of your operations?
It certainly does. And so they evaluated 5 different potential possibilities, 5 different types of design. And so they have selected one that they believe reduces environmental or has the minimal amount of environmental impact.
And was it one that Hudbay had input to before?
Absolutely. We and our predecessors, Augusta Resources, worked in conjunction with the Forest Service to ensure that our design is going to minimize impacts and meet as best we can local standards.
You still need also a Clean Water Act permit from the Army Corps of Engineers.
That's correct.
What goes into that process? What are you having to submit and tell them in order for them to evaluate that?
So much of that submission and scientific work was done previously. The 404 permit is now being evaluated by the South Pacific Division of the Army Corps of Engineers, which is based in San Francisco. And they are required to evaluate our impact on traditional navigable waters in the United States. So our site, we have no wetlands or no flowing water on a regular basis. These are what are called ephemeral washes, meaning they flow due to rain events. So on average, we have flow in those washes between 10 and 15 times a year. So they are there to evaluate the impacts on those navigable waters and ensure that we have adequate compensatory mitigation. So the mitigation that we have provided to them is what we think is substantial, and we certainly hope that they agree with us. That evaluation is currently ongoing.
What else is next in the process aside from that permit?
So if we are able to get that permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, and now that the record of decision is completed with the Forest Service, we're going to start working on an administrative process with them called the Mine Plan of Operations. So this is their approval of how we are going to take the commitments that we've made in the record of decision and operationalize them so that we have a common document together that we can work on to ensure that we're going to make and meet our environmental commitments. So we will begin that with the Forest Service in the next couple of weeks and work with them on that until it's complete.
And any sense of timeline of when you'll have sort of a final answer, yes or no, on this mine plan?
No, at this point. The Army Corps of Engineers at the South Pacific Division has been in review now for about 9 or 10 months. And they're doing the thorough process that we've seen from all the federal and state agencies that have been a part of this. So I wouldn't want to guess when they're going to come to the end of that process, but we are confident that they have great science in front of them and that they really know what they're doing and that they'll come to a good decision at the end.
As you know, there are a number of opponents to the proposed mine, anywhere from water impacts, land impacts, animal, air, and just general environmental impact is generally the opposition.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are considering suing over the federal record of decision and other decisions. What impact would that have on you, or what would your response be, other than to obviously fight the lawsuit?
Sure. Well, from our perspective, the agencies that have been involved, state, local, and federal, have done a wonderful job. They put a lot of time and effort into this, and there's a lot of great science that has gone into granting the record of decision and what we certainly hope to be a 404 permit coming up. So it is common for environmental groups to sue federal agencies on those actions, and from our perspective at this point, the permits remain in force while the lawsuits continue, as long as they're not suspended by a federal judge. We'll work with the agencies to defend the permits because we think they've done fabulous work, but we expect to be able to continue work while those lawsuits are underway.
How many people work in Tucson for Hudbay at this point?
Right now we have about 30 people, but with the record of decision and hopefully Mine Plan of Operations and the 404 permit coming hopefully over the next few months, we expect to begin ramping up and hiring. The project will go through a number of stages. The construction stage, which will last somewhere between 2.5 and 3 years, we'll have roughly 2,000 employees, or that's about where it will peak during the construction phase. We issued a report at the end of March that laid out the capital requirements and whatnot, so it's just under $2 billion for us to build the mine, which we'll spend in that 2.5 to 3 year period of time. That report also showed that we'll have somewhere around 600 full-time employees during the 19-year mine life of the project.
I also asked one of the mine's opponents for his reaction to the Forest Service's draft record of decision. Randy Saraglio works at the Center for Biological Diversity and has said the mine would be bad for southern Arizona's wildlife, air, and water quality.
The Forest Service was really premature in issuing this record of decision. Throughout the environmental impact statement process, they said, well, as long as this mine complies with all applicable laws, we're going to approve it. And it's not yet clear that that's the case. And they waited for 3 years, but then all of a sudden, with the change in administration, they just decided to plow forward and issue the decision. And there's not really any reason for that other than politics and the fact that the Trump administration believes it's somehow above the law.
The Center for Biological Diversity and also the group Save the Scenic Santa Ritas, which are part of a coalition that opposes the mine. You've been opposed at every step of the way, all the public process, chances you've had for feedback. Will you, any of the groups that you're involved with, take this to court?
Oh, I think a litigation is inevitable with projects like this, and it comes from either side. It just depends on what the permit decision is. A lot of people don't realize that actually most environmental litigation in our country is filed by corporations when they don't get what they want from the federal government. So in this case, the Forest Service has approved this, and yeah, we have no choice but to keep fighting.
So what could you fight in court? How could you fight it?
Well, the United States Environmental Protection Agency called this one of the very worst environmental impact statements they've ever seen. So 40 years we've had the National Environmental Policy Act, and thousands of such documents have been prepared, and this is one of a tiny handful that received an inadequate rating from the EPA. So, it's litigating this case is like shooting at the broadside of a barn. There are so many problems with this analysis, and the Forest Service suppressed public comment. They short-circuited the process in many ways. The company was not forthcoming with information. There's all kinds of problems with how this process was conducted, and I think the proof is in the pudding. The document is terrible, and it will be challenged, and challenged successfully, I believe.
The other side of that is it's been a decade of public process, so I think there's room to argue on the other side that it hasn't been inadequate. It's been, in fact, proficient public feedback opportunities.
Well, the simple answer to that is time does not equal quality. These things take a long time to analyze because the impacts are so broad and so deep, and truthfully, so dangerous to our community. You know, the mine's effect on our air quality, on our water supply, on our water security, our future here in Tucson for 1 million people, are so egregious that it requires more analysis. We're still not exactly sure how this is going to affect the aquifer that puts 20% of our natural groundwater recharge into the Tucson Basin every year. It's pretty clear that we're not going to be able to rely on the Colorado River. You know, we're at the end of the pipe for that supply, and our groundwater becomes increasingly precious with every single year. To squander it, such a huge amount of water on a project like this makes no sense at all.
So the next permit that, at least that we know of in the line of permitting that's required, is a Clean Water Act permit, and that speaks to the use and quality of groundwater.
Yeah, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for administering the Clean Water Act permit that's still on the table, and they actually recommended denial of that permit last fall, which is consistent with what they've been saying all along, that this is simply not in the public interest. And that permit analysis actually goes beyond just water impacts. There's a public interest component to it as well. And we think it's very clear that this project is not in Tucson's public interest. You know, we're long past the bad old days where, you know, desperate communities have to trade public health and, you know, water pollution and air pollution just to have a few hundred jobs. Tucson is way beyond that. You know, we don't have to make that deal with the devil. We can be very careful with our water supply, and, you know, we can say, no, we oppose this project. We don't need, you know, this project. It's going to have a net damaging effect on our community.
Respond to the counter argument that we all need copper in the cameras we use to film this interview, in our cell phones that we now rely on for daily life, that copper is a necessity, and this is one place where it is.
It's true. Copper is a necessity, and that's why it's being mined all over the world in vast quantities, and there's a huge oversupply of copper on the market right now. And people need to realize that the mining industry is not a rational industry. It's not driven by rational market dynamics. It's essentially organized gambling. You get a project and you talk it up like it's the best thing since sliced bread, and you put a lot of money into it. And if you hit it, you get rich. If you miss, well, you go on to someplace else, and you take your little dog and pony show somewhere else. And again, you know, we don't have to just take Hudbay's word for this project that it's somehow going to be the first mine in history that does not pollute the air and pollute the water. You know, that's simply not going to be the case. We need thorough analysis, and we need our federal agencies to protect us and protect the public health in our community against this project.
So from where you sit, what's next?
Well, what's next is we're all sort of waiting for the Army Corps to make a decision. There's no telling how long that will take. This record of decision by the Forest Service will certainly be challenged, so that will happen fairly soon. There's also endangered species issues. You know, we have an incredibly diverse array of wildlife that lives in the Santa Ritas. It is the most biodiverse mountain range in the Sky Island region here in southern Arizona and northern Mexico. And, you know, it's home to ocelot and jaguar and all these other beautiful animals that are going to be chased out if this project is approved. Thousands of acres of public land will be destroyed. It'll be buried under 1 billion tons of toxic waste. And that obviously destroys its wildlife value. So a lot of those species are protected by the Endangered Species Act, and we're going to challenge this project on that level as well. We've already filed a notice of intent to sue the Fish and Wildlife Service over their approval of the project. You know, 4 times in a row, their draft document said, no, this is not compatible with jaguar recovery in the United States. And then somebody up the chain changed it for what is clearly just a political reason. We need science-based decisions to protect public health and protect our wildlife in southern Arizona.
Of course, that's a story we'll continue following. Next week, we'll visit a Tucson Muslim family as the holy month of Ramadan comes to a close. Thanks for watching.